Okay, starting to record the TST call. All
Hello
right,
everyone. No, how do I cancel this?
now I hear a large conference room coming online.
Can you hear us?
Yes, we can. We just started the recording. So let's go ahead and get started. We have a UCST proposal. I'm trying to remember if we've had one of these before that we've actually talked about in any detail here or not. Maybe so, but probably worth a refresher to talk about generally what these mean and what action, if any, the TST needs to take. So why don't we start with just a brief introduction from Yen, who participates on the UCST, as to what this is about, and then we can have the meta discussion a little bit.
Okay, so the requirement boils down to two main things. One is being able to assign a subscriber to a service chain. And then the other one is around being able to chain both VNFs and PNFs. So if you look at the proposal.
I'm not sure quite where to
So I didn't understand.
Okay.
I didn't understand the second part. What, can you repeat the second part, please?
So the second part is they have service chains that include both VNFs and physical network services, right? So devices that provide these services. And so what they want to be able to do is build a chain that includes both VNFs and PNFs and be able to dynamically assign subscribers to them.
I got it.
So just a quick calibration relative to other Cord related work that we know about. This is at the granularity of individual subscribers as opposed to classes of subscribers, which by another name might be called a network slice.
Larry, this is my take on what they're trying to set up. First off, this is the type of service chain they're talking about is a different type than say the EPC, because everything is tagged on to the packet gateway, to the right side of the packet gateway. So as such, everything is more a further processing or diverting IP packets. So
this is the GI LAN.
Yes.
Right? This is the
yes.
GI LAN.
Okay,
exactly.
That's good. That's a great
Keep in mind that it's not mobile only, right? Because they're also calling out PPPoE for fixed.
Yeah.
And
Right.
so,
This is relevant to our Cord as well. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So in addition, what they're trying to do is they're proposing an ONOS application that does the routing and rerouting based on the service chain by looking at both PCRF and the AAA. So the PCRF is going to tell the ONOS app about the specific user subscription, and the AAA is going to actually tell where the corresponding VNF or PNF reside.
So one way of thinking, so the fact that it's both Cord and Cord, to say it that way, in the case of, I'm sorry, we already have in some sense per subscriber classification in the case of Cord, because you came in on from a particular ONU, and sort of the standard Cord strategy is I would have looked your AAA information and gotten back a profile for you anyway. So that problem is sort of baked in already, or that solution is baked in already. So this is quickly going to slip into the meta discussion. So one of the things is this is a perfectly valid use case. It makes sense from a maybe from a business point of view, which is kind of the intent of these use cases, which then leads to the question of what does the TST need to do, and how are we involved in this? I mean, we can make observations like this. We don't have to classify packets in the RCord case because they already are classified in effect at the granularity of individual subscribers.
So I can talk a little bit from the RCord perspective about what's there and what's not there. If you consider the original RCord, yes, subscribers end up in their own VSGs, and in principle, you should be able to create a service chain just for that subscriber, originating from the VSG. In the new RCord, or at least the changes that we are bringing about right now, we're trying to establish the fast path for any subscriber. And so the subscriber termination, instead of the VSG, the subscriber termination happens in the fabric. And right now we are working on a way to just get the subscriber terminated and making its way to the internet. What we haven't planned for is that if you, go ahead.
Sorry, just for my clarification, because I guess I'm unaware of this new RCord. You're essentially implementing the VSG in P4 on a switch. Is that's what's happening?
No, we're not using P4 yet. We are doing the subscriber VLAN termination, the double VLAN popping, matching on the subscriber's public IP address, which right now is not on the VSG anymore. It's actually in the RG.
Okay.
And so we terminate the subscriber. That means we pop off the double VLAN tags. We match on the destination IP and send the traffic to the internet. On the way back, we look at the public IP address and route it back to the appropriate leaf switch. And then we push the VLAN tags, the CNS VLAN tags back on, and send it to the OLT that subscriber is on. What we don't do right now is QoS. And we are looking at ways to do the hierarchical QoS that is necessary for the BNG-like functionality. That's still down the road.
So we're basically moving the in data plane processing out of the compute node and into the switch, and you're doing it via OpenFlow today, but perhaps P4 tomorrow, type of thing.
Yeah, that's possible. Yes. The deal is that as we're trying to get this up and running, we have not so far planned. It's still a roadmap item for the subscribers that do need a service chain, that don't just want to go out to the internet, wants to go through something else before it goes out to the internet. There has to be a way to redirect such subscribers, or maybe a subset of the traffic for that subscriber onto the compute nodes, then go through a normal, hop from one VM to another, and then back into the fabric, and then out to the internet.
Is it possible that multiple VNFs in this chain will actually be implemented in the fabric, as opposed to some in the one in the fabric and the rest on compute nodes?
That is also possible, yes.
Or their dedicated hardware also, right, based upon the use case. So
and then it works into the PNF thing that you were talking about in this UCST proposal, right? Because then in principle, if the fabric is responsible for redirecting traffic, it can do it to a PNF, it can do it to a VNF, and so on. So that part hasn't been quite worked out yet. We are focusing on getting this fast path through the fabric first. What I'm saying is that, yes, if you go to the old RCord, then yes, it makes sense that on a per VSG basis, you could have subscribed to a particular service chain, and we can do that with Cord as it is today. Perhaps not dynamically change that. I don't know, I'm not sure. But at least as a first shot, every subscriber can, in principle, get its own chain. But with the new RCOD, there's a lot more work that needs to happen.
What I don't understand is, I mean, in principle, you still can do that. You knew who the subscriber was at one point, and you can retain that information. But you're saying there's just more work to do to make it work.
Yeah, it's a question of the plumbing. With the old RCOD, or rather the Cord platform as it is today, we have a way to go from one VM to another VM. So for example, from the VSG to a service VM, we have this VXLAN-based tunnels that basically overlay through the network. But when you are talking about the fabric essentially doing the VSG job of terminating the subscriber, then for the fabric to be able to redirect traffic, that needs additional work, and it's not clear exactly what what solution we will adopt. You could imagine that the fabric does the same thing that the overlay network does, so it does VXLAN tunnels, or you could imagine some other way of redirecting traffic in the fabric. So that design decision I've sort of pushed off to the future right now. So the UCST, what I'm trying to get at is the UCST case is very valid, and part of it can be done with traditional RCOD. The new RCOD will take a lot more work to do it.
What is the timeline for this fast path, kind of the new RCOD?
We are targeting end of May.
Okay. So given that, and assuming going forward that will be the only implementation of RCOD and will deprecate the off-switch non-fast path version
So,
of SVG?
David, I don't know that necessarily implies that. One could imagine fast and slow paths, and you pick the one depending on the functionality you want. That is still an option, I think.
I guess the point is, if we can create VNF chains between this fast path and VNFs on a compute node, we wouldn't. Yeah, you could still support a VSG as on a compute node resource, but it makes no difference at this point, right? Why would you take the slow path if that's already implemented in the fabric? And if you need to chain to a different function, we're going to have to figure out how to chain from the fast path to the slow path anyway.
Well, all right. So
yeah,
that's right. It's almost doing the future VSG as implementing pieces of the slow path. Those that had to be in servers.
Yeah, I would agree with David that rather than choosing one or the other, the old way or the new way, I would try to make the new way do the things that the old way could do.
Okay, so we have one takeaway from this discussion, which is not the proposer's fault at all, but just they need to be aware of the new design of our cord with the fast path and the fabric, and take that into account. Are there other takeaways like that we can relay to them? Ose, do you see anything MCORD specific of that type?
I really don't, Larry, because this is, like I said, on the right side of packet gateway. So we can treat the whole mobility service chain, if you will, between the UE and the packet gateway as a tunnel. So that tunnel is already established. So the packet gateway now receives or transmits user equipment packets with a specific corresponding IP. So at that stage, I think RCOD, AMCORD will behave exactly the same way.
Right. Okay. So not to intentionally complicate this, but is there any value in their thinking about these service chains being on the left side of the packet gateway so that they are part of the mobile end of the network, the access network?
There could be certain network services that will be there, but the kinds of services that they are thinking is really more a generic nature, right? So these are the GI LAN services. So I would say for these types of services, this is the appropriate architecture.
Yeah. Okay.
Larry, kind of back to your original question, kind of what does the TST need to do here? Is the goal here really to say, go back to them and say this is a valid use case, which they probably assume because it's their business case, and then use this to help inform decisions going forward in terms of Cord? I guess what action are they looking for from us?
Well, that's a great question, and I honestly don't fully appreciate all of the implications. I think this is ultimately, I think there's two things. One is from a Cord-wide perspective, that this be taken into account as we do, planning and resource allocation, deciding what problems to work on. The second thing is from a technical, so resource allocation, to make sure this use case gets sufficient attention. But the assumption is that because it is a use case, that will be an opportunity to recruit through brigades and so on. So I don't know specifically that we would have a role in this. But the second thing I think is more important is that they do this in a way that is consistent with where Cord as a whole is going, both kind of platform-wide and our Cord-specific changes that are coming, just like we've been talking about. And if there's anything that is of generic value, I'll throw it out as if we had a traffic classifier as a service, that could be of general value. And, if we could identify things like that, that would be a good outcome.
Yeah, this is where I think Cord, in terms of an open source project, is a little different, right? Because typically if someone needed a traffic classifier, they wouldn't necessarily go to open source project and say, hey, I'd like a traffic classifier. They dedicate someone to build that traffic classifier and contribute it.
Well, I think that I would like to think of that as still a possibility here, and I would only suggest that they do it in a way that, if there were any constraints that we could shed light on, that if they did it, it would be of more general value.
So just picking up on the traffic classifier use case, imagine the new RCORD, right? The subscriber traffic is being terminated in the fabric. Most of the traffic is going to the internet straight in the fast path. There is certain kind of traffic, however, pick an example, Netflix, right? Netflix traffic that you want to take from that subscriber and actually go to a local cache or whatever in your compute nodes. Now, how does the fabric identify Netflix traffic? Well, mostly actually it doesn't, right? So it's not enough to look at, up to layer 4 information, because all that's going to tell you is that it's a TCP connection. But at that point, if you have some way of doing a deep packet inspection to figure out that, oh yeah, this is really, this is really Netflix traffic or something, then you should be able to do this redirection for only that kind of traffic from that particular subscriber. However, to do that encryption, it's almost like you need a dedicated PNF, right? Because if you had to send all your traffic to the compute nodes just to figure out what is the Netflix traffic, well, then the rest of the traffic don't take advantage of the path because you're going off into the compute nodes. So if you have dedicated PNFs that could be open, may not be open, I don't know, then such kind of classification can be done, and therefore different chains can be created for different types of traffic from the same subscriber.
It also seems to me that one thing you're going to have to do is do traffic classification kind of on the start of a flow, if you will, connection, if you will. And then once I say, this connection or this network flow is Netflix traffic or this type of traffic, then you're going to want to push back down to the switch. I would think OpenFlow rules that pick up on that, and you don't have to classify each packet, right? You're really just classifying on connection initiation almost. Wouldn't that be the way to do this, to keep it all fast path?
Yeah, I think something like that. And now you've crossed that line into how can you make this a general purpose facility that serves this use case and potentially others. And so meta statement, I kind of consider that a critical part of what we do on these calls and kind of TST level, which is where is the commonality so that these use cases don't turn into isolated one-offs, if there's anything of general value.
Also, totally different than what we've been discussing, but as you all know, M-Cord is kind of different than R-Cord in the sense that we do have to support mobility. And the minute we say we have to support mobility, where the GI LAN service chain resides becomes an important issue. So when you support mobility, and you have these mobile edge clouds, do you really want to reside the GI LANs at the edge clouds, or is the centralized cloud a better location for it, is the question that I'm asking.
Yeah, that's good. Well,
because if what I'm stating is true, then really what they're trying to do is not part of M-Cord at all. It may be part of some part of R-Cord maybe, but for the case of mobility, these functions should be residing maybe in the centralized cloud.
All right, that's a good general question to ask. What needs to happen at the very edge?
Yeah, because depending on that, then we have to also start worrying about migrating the service chain from one edge to the other.
Yep. All right, so I think that's a valid second big issue to raise. Let me try a third one, which again I'm coming back to the is there something general we can take away from this? And I think that's of value to a use case because it flips this on its head and says, how can the platform team and those involved in the core actually contribute as well? It would be nice if we had a demonstration of maybe not the full-fledged service chain, but that we could include some PNF in an end-to-end packet processing. I don't know what a good example would be necessarily, but taking that subset of the problem and trying to do a POC to understand how we would make it work in Cord would be helpful.
Well, in the traditional Cord platform, which is using VTN and the overlays and so on, we have not worked out the PNF-based service chain because it involves doing VXLAN tunnels, VXLAN tunnel terminations in the fabric, and
yeah,
that's been on our roadmap for a while. It's just not been a priority, so we haven't implemented that functionality, and so that's just where we are, and it's not even in our near-term roadmap, unfortunately.
All right, but that.
Yeah, I mean, I come back to yes, I agree. We need to do PNFs in a chain, but we've kind of got a roadmap of work already booked up, and I don't think we have people twiddling their thumbs saying, "Hey, what can I do?" Right in terms of the core team. So if this becomes a high priority for this person who submitted this, that's when you got to say, "Look, I understand it's a priority for you. Please give us people." Right? If you don't work on the project, it's open source. You can't just throw requirements over the wall.
Yeah, so I think that's a great point. So I think that one of the takeaways we have here is that while service chain support for PNFs would be really valuable, that has an implication on what Saurabh was just talking about, terminating the VXLANs in the fabric as opposed to OVS. If we could carve that out as a sub problem and it was of a high enough priority, then it would be a well-defined thing that a brigade could be formed around or whatever.
Well, usually the use cases will come with who will do the work. So if you look under sponsorship and collaborating organizations, you'll see that the developer resource will come from Ardella and Netsia for this use case. But I think part of the other thing that we're trying to look for from the TST is a review of the proposal, and also look at kind of the technical work that is needed, right? So I think some of these folks aren't, they may not have as much knowledge of Cord and the underlying infrastructure. So the question comes down to, is their assessment of the work accurate? Is there work that is needed in XOS itself or in the infrastructure to enable them to do this? So some of the feedback is the technical feedback to say, is their assessment of the work needed to support this use case accurate?
Right. And I think we've actually got a pretty good set of responses. The way I've been recording it, and please say if you see it differently, is I see three big points. One is classification as a general purpose tool would be a very good thing, but it needs to be done in a way that's consistent with having gotten into the fast path. And just this general message of we're trying to look for the commonality of that solution. Number two, and this one I don't know if it's more of a business argument or technical, but it has to do with what belongs at the edge and what belongs in the core, and a careful consideration of that. Otherwise, you have to also then solve the mobility problem. I guess it does reduce to a technical issue. And the third one is including PNFs in a service chain sounds like a great idea, but it has the following technical implication, which is that we would need to do it in a way that was consistent with doing it in the fabric as opposed to doing it in OVS.
Yeah, so just to shed light on the last point that you made, if you go with the Cord platform as it is and uses OVS and VTN, then yes, VXLAN termination in the fabric is a necessary is necessary for that. If you also bring in the fact that the new R-Cord is doing fast path, then to get off of the fast path and into the compute nodes, there is a need for a way to do that. And it's not clear if VXLAN termination is the right way to do that. So there's these two sort of technical points to make on that last.
Okay, good. All right. So the PNF argument, there's an A and a B depending on which way you're viewing the fabric. All right. So
there's one more thing. So if you look under scope for a minimum viable solution,
roll down here.
They called out it will be possible to define different function chain for download and upload traffic of a particular subscriber.
I'm struggling to find where this is in the document. Can you? There it is. I found it.
So in there, I see user and service chain information database, for example, CRF or AAA. How do you envision that to live with the service chain information we are now storing in XOS?
I think that point would be related to the R-Cord trials that we're working towards with different operators, where we are pulling in, I guess we're calling it subscriber provisioning, but it's the point at which we learn what's the word we're using? The service, I don't know if it was profile or the service. Plan
or policy.
Yeah, it's the collection of parameters for this particular subscriber, which we learned from a AAA server, ultimately. So there's overlap there that we would want to be consistent with. Maybe I can make that a fourth point, which is this upfront, there's a database somewhere with per subscriber parameters intersects with the subscriber provisioning that we're doing in other contexts. Is that the point you were getting at, Matteo?
Yeah, I think you answered my question. So this information will live somewhere, and XOS will be responsible to manage them and push them down in.
Yeah, that's the way we're designing it in those other use cases. Yeah. All right. Well, I think this is likely to be an iterative process, and I think we've got some pretty good feedback. Is there any other? Are there any other high points to touch on? All right, I will provide this feedback to the CST and to the proposers and see where it goes from there. I'm not quite sure what the next step will be, but we'll find out.
Larry, one last thing, just following up on your earlier question, we have to make sure that all of these services that for which we're doing service chaining reside on, at least in the mobile case, to outside the EPC chain. Because if it is inside, we also have to start dealing with GTP tunnel encapsulation, decapsulation problems.
Okay, good. Right, else you have to deal with the tunneling. Okay. All right, let's set that one aside. Are there other topics? There was one that came up this morning that I thought might be worth a few minutes on the on Slack, but let me see if there's anything else first. Okay, not hearing it. Let me try to introduce the question, which is, we have been treating Tosca as a specification of a workflow to initialize a Cord pod. But of course, if it's a long-running pod, then you will be making incremental changes to the configuration over time. And those will not be reflected in the Tosca. So at that point, the Tosca is not sufficient to restart, or it no longer represents the current state of the pod. Is that fine? Do we want to treat the Tosca as the authoritative summary of the configuration? Do we try to keep what has been activated in the models inside of Cord consistent with the Tosca spec that comes in from above? If we believe that the Tosca spec is the authoritative statement, then we keep punting the single source of truth up the stack. Where does that process stop? And just how do we think about that? I don't think there's any easy answers here, but just from a tactical point of view, what is the right thing for Cord to do in the near to medium term on this issue?
So I don't think it's right to treat Tosca as the authoritative state, just because someone can come in via the GUI or the REST API and change the dynamic state of the system. I think Tosca is just one way of specifying that state. You can apply new Tosca recipes at runtime that replace parts of old Tosca recipes. But you can also go in via the GUI or REST API and change something. So I think it is handy for us for bootstrapping and for, sort of codifying things that we need to create in a way other than telling people to go in to the GUI and click 30 things. We can say, here's a Tosca recipe that does that. But to tell people they have to maintain a list of Tosca every time they want to change something and go back and update that Tosca seems like it's defeating the purpose of having a data model that you can interact with and be dynamic with.
Okay, so let me translate that. Basically, it's what you're saying is not our problem. If you have an OSS BSS process or orchestration or global automation, and you're telling us what to do at a particular pod, then it's your responsibility to remember everything you've told us if you want us to if you want to be able to tell us all of that again. I'm trying to find a way to stop a slippery slope of continually pushing the authoritative, our responsibility up the stack, I guess, is Cord's responsibility up the stack. And this seems like a potential slippery slope.
So, Tosca isn't meant to be the runtime operational state of the system.
No, it's not. So there's clearly the runtime operational state. What is Cord's responsibility beyond providing, interfaces for you to set and change that state?
So part of our responsibility, I think, is high availability, that we don't lose the state trivially.
Sure. Good.
So we are, we do implement a database. We are the keeper of that state. I mean, that doesn't mean that someone can't keep their own copy so that they could destroy us and give us all the state again. But I think that's a design point for the user of Cord, not for us, the implementers of Cord.
Okay, so is
it possible to export what is required to rebuild the system in its current state back to Tosca from the operational?
Yes, and we did that at one point. That code's probably bit rotted, but that is an approach.
But also not all state comes from an external OSS BSS, right? Some of it is being discovered from the data plane as subscribers turn up their ONUs and their, whatever it is, right? So you can always relearn that stuff, but you don't necessarily want to have to go and tell all the subscribers to reboot their boxes just because you had an outage, right?
Well, except at that point, it strikes me as a catastrophic. Take it back to a checkpoint, but there will be implied restarts on various parties' parts. I mean, I don't being able. Let's call this checkpointing the state, just to give it a name. We're checkpointing the states that we could restart if we needed to. Checkpointing every ONU that's been fired up or home gateway seems like a step too far.
I don't think we should treat Tosca as a persistent storage for backup of our system. It doesn't really look to me what it was designed for. It is a language that let us define model and push model to the system. Theoretically, yes, you can export everything you have in the system into Tosca, but is that the best way to keep up a checkpoint of the system?
Yeah, maybe not. So let me push in the following direction. Then I completely buy this notion that this is, the way we've been talking about it. That being the case, we are now working on a primitive Tosca loader, and there's been discussion of making it more and more capable. It almost becomes the overlord to say, it doesn't matter what's happened below. I can always recover from here. Which again is that slippery slope. So maybe to put this to Scott, what are the intentions, since you're working on it, for that Tosca loading container, the container that loads Tosca, to do anything other than just load the bootstrap Tosca? Why does that have a longer life than just bootstrapping?
So I pasted a link to the design document at the bottom for anyone who wants to follow the discussion. So the reason that this has more of a lifespan beyond just initializing the system and exiting is that Cord is dynamic, and we want to be able to let people run Tosca recipes at runtime. We do have an endpoint. They could submit their recipe directly to that endpoint, though there's a possibility that endpoint in the Tosca engine itself may not be present at the time that a person tries to submit to it because the core is rebuilding due to dynamic load or because there's just another availability issue. So the point of this Tosca container was to accept a recipe and retry it until that recipe succeeds.
And nothing more.
And nothing more.
Does that imply that it's omnipotent or whatever, that it can be applied multiple times after a partial failure and things will still be okay?
Yeah, so our our approach right now is that it's idempotent and the container is very simple. All it does is take a list of recipes via Kubernetes config map, run them until the entire list succeeds. If any recipe fails, the container crashes and restarts. Yeah, so sort of the idea was to take that to a next step where it's, I mean, that's very static. I mean, that's the container comes up with just one set of recipes. We want to be able to add new recipes at runtime dynamically. So I think that's where we wanted this next step to go.
Right. So with that bound on the objective, it's a fairly modest thing that it's doing, and maybe there's no other issue here.
Yeah, so I think that the key issue it came down to with these alternatives is where to store the state where the Tosca loader remembers what recipes it has run. Certainly one design point could be that state is simply thrown away and we rerun everything. I think that's what we do now. Another design point would be we try to remember what we have run so we don't keep rerunning things that have already succeeded. And similarly, we wouldn't want to accidentally rerun something that overrode a setting that someone had applied to the GUI at a later time. So I don't think we want to come back to rerunning the same set of initial recipes over and over throughout the lifetime of a pod. We need to somehow know that those recipes have been applied and don't need to be run again, lest we start changes.
So if as soon as a recipe successfully runs, you're free to forget it.
Yeah, I think that's what we could do. Now, if we're going to forget it, do we need to remember that we forgot it? I guess that's where the design points come down to.
Well, again, it's at some level, again, this is back to that slippery slope. It's someone else's responsibility. When we offer a particular behavior, and it's somebody else's responsibility to use it correctly. If you keep passing me old Tosca, I've got no choice but to keep running old Tosca for you.
Larry?
Yeah.
There are a few opinions about this if you look in the configuration management space. Certain systems will just say, I have the authoritative state and I will overwrite everything that that somebody manually did because I'm right and I want to push towards a state. Things like Puppet work that way. I get the feeling that somebody might want the system to work that way, and maybe if they want it to work that way, what they do is they bring up the Tosca loader and they touch everything in a way that says, run these every time. Or maybe we need to figure out a different set of possible ways to run the Tosca, and maybe you mark it with a bit that says, run this on every load, run this on every, or only run this once. Maybe if we had some ways to mark in the data model what should happen with each Tosca file, that could be useful.
Yeah, I think one of the things that came to my mind when I was thinking about this was something like systemd in Linux distros. It has the ability to do dependencies between services. It has the ability to say, something runs once, something runs multiple times, something runs every time an event occurs. So, that would possibly be the ultimate that we could hope for is something that was that aware of state that it would automatically run recipes at the appropriate times, and recipes were codified in such a way that they specified when they should run based on events. I don't know that we want to shoot for that sort of ultimate endpoint, or we want to just stick with something simple, but we could certainly aim for that if we wanted to.
Yeah, as a point of practicality, you might want your Tosca that sets up all your user accounts to always get run every time. So if somebody misconfigures that, you reboot the system and you have access again if somebody was to lock you out. But you might not want everything else to get reapplied.
Zach, I completely disagree on that. I'm a user, I change my password, I don't want the operator to repush my old password.
But I'm not saying that would that would be the default. I'm just saying that might be an option that somebody might say, I want the Tosca file that does X or any specific thing to always run, and that it could be any setting, not just that.
So could someone remind me the practical problem that was biting us to cause this to build this loader in the first place? What is the most immediate problem it's solving?
I think the most immediate problem it solved was retries, because we don't know when all these containers come up in Kubernetes, they sort of all run at once. And we don't know that when we're trying to apply these Tosca recipes, the system is actually ready to accept them. So, we'll try them and they'll fail because the core is not online. Then we'll try them and they'll fail because it wanted to create a VSG service instance and the VSG service had not been loaded into the core yet. And then we'll just keep retrying until it succeeds. So I think we used to do that with Ansible. There's this big Ansible loop in the old build system where something would retry 40 times every 5 seconds until it got through. This is sort of doing the same thing that used to do.
All right, so one limitation we could put on this is to say this is something that's used at boot time because of all of the randomness of when things come up at boot time. So it's a value for running the Tosca the first time you run it, but it makes no promises beyond that.
Yeah, the issue I take with that is we've sort of moved in the direction, or we were moving in the direction that we were separating bringing up sort of an empty platform from loading a profile into the platform. So, I could modify your statement to say this is something we worry about at the time we're loading the we're loading the profile into the platform. But then, you could sort of break that down into finer grains. You say, maybe I'm loading 3 different profiles. Maybe I'm going to load R-Cord, M-Cord, and E-Cord. I'm not going to load them all at the same time. It becomes a finer and finer grain thing until you get to the point where we're just arbitrarily running Tosca recipes. And those Tosca recipes could cause services to be onboarded, which could cause things to become a bit unavailable and need to be retried.
Right.
Certainly we can say that there are, most of the time is a steady state where your Tosca recipe will succeed. But it's sort of these choke points around when you're, onboarding new services that you create situations where Tosca could fail.
So I don't know, I have a simple question. Do we really need to spin up a container that needs to have some intelligence in it to make a REST request against an API that the operator can control? And
so I think the other reason for doing this, or I should say, an other reason was to be able to launch everything off of one Helm command. So, we can use Helm init or Helm initialize, whatever it is, to bring up the whole system. That includes tasks that were formerly done in the old build system by Ansible. They now happen in Helm, therefore they're happening inside of a container. So that's sort of the other purpose of this, is to have this mechanism that submits REST API calls.
Okay, Scott, thanks for filling in the holes that I had about this. So you have been looking for guidance on what to do, but maybe you know exactly what to do.
Well, I don't, because there's there's a continuum of implementations from the very simple thing we have now that we just run recipes and then throw it away, to this super featureful thing that knows dependencies between recipes and processes events and has an API where people can add recipes so they're queued and run. And so I think it comes down to, as a group, we need to decide, what do we want this thing to do? Do we want simple? Do we want featureful?
My vote would be to not go whole hog on it and not do that end. If there's something just beyond the simple that provides sufficient value, If you took this from 1 to 10, and the simple thing we have today is a 1, what would 2 be?
I think 2 would be something that has persistent state and would remember what recipes it already ran and allow you to add new ones.
And
sometimes you need to force the rerun of a recipe if some state got munged, yeah? So you can't just always, if I've already run this recipe once, doesn't mean I don't want to run it again.
Yeah, so maybe there's a reason to touch everything in it so it's all dirty. So maybe that's the 2 point is remember what you've ran, have an option to rerun it, and have the option to add more things to it.
Yeah, I would try to hone in on a 2 or a 2.5 on it and stop there for now.
I mean, I guess I keep worrying about, tracking what we've run, and given that you run script at T0, after it's complete, there's no guarantee at all that the fact that you run it means anything, because it's a live operational system that changes dynamically via APIs and everything. So I'm trying to understand the value of knowing that I've already run this script.
Is that purely an optimization? I mean, well, I guess it's overriding something that I've...
Yeah, like Mateo's point that we don't want to accidentally reset everyone's passwords back to let me in because we reran the container.
Yeah, but, don't be stupid. Might be the rule, right? There's nothing that stops a super user from doing rm-rf star. There's nothing to stop someone from running an Ansible script twice. Are we adding value from this protection, or is it overhead without real thing, right? I mean, again, the fact that I ran the script once doesn't mean it's still, it should never be run again, or the state is what I just ran. I mean, the minute I run an Ansible script, the state of the system, in a live system, the state of the system's changed. The minute that script ends, there's no guarantee that if I rerun that script, nothing gets executed. How is this different?
We've set sort of a goal of item potency such, well, that just allows you to rerun the things twice without making a problem. I guess what's part of it is that we've aggregated several recipes together inside this container, and we're rerunning them all. So, if the first recipe is set the administrator password, and then you tack on, the final recipe, which is, bring up David's house as a subscriber, and, you decide to, a week from now, run those as a group. I mean, certainly that's on you for grouping them together, but you did just, in your attempt to add David's house as a subscriber, you reset the administrator password. So,
yep.
That, again, like you say, that's on the administrator that he ran that thing and that he grouped all of that functionality together. But it seems like we should give people building blocks that don't encourage them to do these sort of unanticipated bindings of lots of things together.
That I agree with, but that's different than saying, keeping a persistent that I've ever run. It's, again, here are the best practices how to build these things. Don't group them where it doesn't make sense to group them, and kind of instructions or tools to support that versus tools to, track, have I run this recipe, and either don't run it again or be able to tell if I need to.
So if we view our administrator as competent, one way of looking at this is, instead of loading and these recipes into the container over time and asking the logic to keep straight what does and does not need to be re-executed, what if instead we had an interface that gave the administrator access to, via a global file system of some sort, this is what is known to the Tosca loading container. I can go read every single bit of Tosca that's there, and I can change it. And that is the golden state that will get re-executed if I ever ask it to.
I mean, I guess from an operational standpoint, I could see the value of saying, look, there is a log somewhere of what recipe I ran at what time, but that doesn't necessarily change what happens if I run them again or if I edit and run them again. It might be interesting to be able to say what Tosca is available to run, if that's what you're getting at.
Well, yeah, so that's sort of the point, that the decision as to what Tosca the Tosca loader runs is entirely in the hands of the administrator, who keeps a shared file system correct with whatever behavior he wants at that moment.
So at this point, we are basically providing a tool to make sure to the operator if he has to keep the state somewhere.
Yeah. All I promise to do is to run whatever is in our the shared directory. It's your responsibility.
So this is an init directory for Tosca.
Yeah. Exactly. Okay, that's an idea. We can pick this up on tomorrow's platform call as well if we need to, but we should probably shut this one down. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Cheers.
Bye, all.
Bye.